So for today's agenda, I'm going to be diving into my presenter bio and then talking a little bit about why we should be working on our emotions in the job search and talking about interview jitters, rejection sensitivity, imposter syndrome, job loss, motivation blocks, and then finally at the end we'll have a bit of Q&A. But I do want everybody to be leveraging the chat box. So if anything comes up during the session, feel free to leverage the chat box. I'll be keeping an eye out and responding as we go. And then towards the end, we can kind of dive in a little bit deeper into questions because I know that everyone's got thoughts on their mind. So I don't want it to be all about me telling you, but really having you engage with me and making sure that information is as relevant and relatable as possible. So a little bit about myself. I am the founder of Beam Career Coaching and Recruiting. But for this session, I kind of wanted to focus on the coaching aspect since I know I'm speaking with job seekers primarily. I'm also the producer and host of a workplace wellness and career transformation podcast called Career Catharsis. So if you listen to podcasts and you want to learn a little bit about workplace productivity, wellness, how to perform better, stay motivated, find a job, career-related topics, I would encourage you to check out Career Catharsis. It's available to stream on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, a lot of the major platforms. And a few fun facts about me and my background. So I've actually helped over 1,000 people get hired in the past decade. So I spent a couple of years as a bilingual recruiter in banking. And I've also worked in the technology sector for a couple of years. And my last role was a program manager and diversity lead for Hired.com, which was recently acquired by Vettery, owned by Adecco. And then I have a background in psychology as well as French. So I went to Western University. And then I've also taken a few courses in HR management at University of Toronto. And I really do consider myself to be a holistic career coach. So really thinking about the human experience when it comes to hiring and not really looking at this separation of work life and personal life and really seeing what that intersection is and how finding a job that you love is so integral to leading a life that you're proud of and happy with. Another fun fact is that I grew up in 5 countries. So I've spent some time in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia before finally ending up here in Canada. And moving on to why work on your emotions during your job search. So before I kind of dive into this question, I'd love to hear from everyone. If you want to share in the chat box, what are some emotions that come up for you when you think about your job search? If you were to name maybe one major emotion when you hear job search, what do you think? Anxiety, that's a very common one. Does anyone get excited about their job search? Hopefully by the end of the session, a lot of the anxiety that people feel will be turned into excitement and people will hopefully be feeling motivated and recharged to kind of dive in and really own their journey there. I'm also going to check the session chat. So, okay, some people are saying nervous, defeated, stress, disappointment. These are all very common emotions. So the key insight when it comes to working on your emotions in your job search is that obviously your job search is emotionally taxing because we're dealing with uncertain outcomes. So uncertainty can trigger fight or flight as well as freeze responses. And proactively managing your mental health can prevent emotions getting in the way of your job search. So even if you're somebody who tends to be really confident and otherwise is really positive, proactively practicing mindfulness and making sure that you're taking care of yourself and preparing for situations where a lot of uncertainty is involved is going to make sure that you mitigate any risk of kind of fumbling in the process. So a second key insight is that emotions aren't good or bad, they just are. So all emotions are valid and carry weight on our bodies and mental health. And while we might not always be able to control feeling a certain way, we can control our response. So that's really what this session is about, is controlling our response. So really, when it comes to emotions, you want to lean in towards acceptance and regulation rather than trying to eliminate or eradicate them. So when it comes to calming interview jitters, a key insight there is to do your research. So talking about uncertain outcomes and uncertainty, I think one thing that we can control, that we do have power over, is how much research we do and how prepared we are. So making sure that you know your own career narrative. I think this is a piece that a lot of job seekers take for granted. They think that they know what they've done, they know what they've accomplished, but then as soon as an interview comes up and you're asked a question, you suddenly seem to have forgotten everything you've done, right? So it's really important to take stock of your accomplishments and practice. So whether you want to do a mock interview and maybe record it yourself and then listen to it and give yourself feedback, that's one way that you can kind of lead your own practice. Or you can phone a friend or a mentor and have them practice with you, where they can ask you some common questions. And doing a mock interview is a great way to feel more confident. Another piece of research that I would really say is important is looking at the company details. A lot of the times recruiters or companies might not give you a whole lot of information in the job description itself. So that's where your stalking skills come into play. Check them out on LinkedIn, check out their career website, but particularly check out the press tab on the website to kind of see what they've been mentioned in the news for recently. That's another way that you can spark interest in the actual interview. And you can also sound a lot more confident that way, as it's very evident that you have done your research and you're prepared. You're coming in and showing up with more insight, right? And then lastly, I think it's really important to know your interviewers. Sometimes there's last minute changes in an interview schedule and somebody else might have to jump in. So you have to be prepared to roll with the punches, but the more information you have, the better. So I would advise you to reach out to the recruiter and ask them in advance, who will I be speaking with in this interview, right? So if you could get their full name, that way you can check them out on LinkedIn. If they're not on LinkedIn, they might be on the company website page. But at the very least, knowing what their title is will give you a really good indication of what does this person care about, right? So if you're going in for a software developer position, let's say, so typically the final round for a software developer position can last up to 4 to 5 hours, and they'll be meeting with many different people. So in that situation, what your response would be for the same question for a product manager asking you that question versus the engineering manager asking you the same question would be different. So knowing your audience is another way to kind of relieve anxiety and kind of reduce that uncertainty during the interview process. And then the reason I have 2 images here of pause and flow is I think a lot of the interview process has to do with repeating this cycle of pausing and then finding your flow. So this is a very tricky thing that comes with practice. I think a lot of us have this habit where sometimes we are struggling to find the words, or we go off on a tangent where really we should be taking a moment, taking a step back and just practicing the pause, right? So interviewing is a little bit of a dance as well, where you give up control, let the interviewer move on, and then respond, find your flow, and then take a pause. And if anything is ever unclear, I encourage everybody to ask clarifying questions. That's another way to relieve uncertainty and relieve some of that anxiety that you might be feeling or interview jitters. The next point is overcoming rejection sensitivity. So going through an interview process can be daunting, it can be exciting, and you're worrying about whether or not you're going to be called in for a second round. So undoubtedly somewhere in your job search journey, you're going to hear a no, maybe a lot of no's, and rejection can hurt. It can feel bad, especially when we felt that we really connected with the interviewer, we connected with the company. Maybe we started fantasizing what we would look like 5 years from now, climbing up that ladder. But a key insight there is that rejection is simply redirection. And it's important to build a relationship and stay open to new opportunities at the company down the road. So just because it's a no for now doesn't mean it's no forever. And lastly, I would say always ask for feedback. So companies are not always going to provide feedback. They might have policies against this, but it never hurts to ask. And the more open and positive you are about asking, the more likely they are to give you some feedback and help you. So try to capitalize on any openness that the recruiter or hiring manager might have to share some insight, and wish them luck in finding the right person for the role. And definitely add them on LinkedIn, because you never know, down the road, you might be able to kind of check in with them and see whether the opportunity is up for grabs again, or whether a similar role is open in the near future. So quick question for everyone. How often have you felt rejection sensitivity, or is this something that you struggle with? And how often does this feeling maybe come up in your job search? Very often. Yeah. So it is a constant struggle. I think, there is a lot of anticipation. Immediately after the interview, you're wondering, I wonder what they thought about me. Did I answer that question right? So there's a lot of self-doubt and guessing. So I think the truth of the matter is that you can only control certain pieces, such as doing your research, being prepared, your performance on the day of, following up. And then anything outside of that, that's outside of your locus of control. So you have to acknowledge that. And you have to recognize that you might be redirected towards a better opportunity. And I would also consider asking yourself the question, was this a good opportunity for me? A lot of the times, we want somebody to accept us for a role when we ourselves might not actually consider it to be the best opportunity long term. So remember that it's a two-way street. Interviewing is a two-way street, and you really want to be considering whether this is a company I see myself growing in. Did I enjoy meeting with the team? Is the role something that I would enjoy doing? And that gives you a little bit of control as well when you're assessing them as much as they're assessing you. And yeah, so especially if you don't have the answers to the rejection, I think that's where asking for feedback is critical. Again, even if they don't provide any, it really helps to try and probe. And I would also encourage everybody to do a little bit of journaling after each interview. What went well? What didn't go well? And how can I do better next time? So asking yourself those 3 questions can help you grow, and it can provide you with some feedback, especially if you're in a situation where the company isn't able to share those thoughts. A bit of self-reflection can kind of solve for that piece. Moving on to how to beat imposter syndrome. So a key insight here is everybody experiences self-doubt, even experts. So a lot of people will come across as super confident, but trust me, anyone and everyone on the planet has their days where they're not feeling their best. Or if they're really good at coming across as confident, it doesn't mean that they don't doubt themselves in some way. Maybe they don't doubt themselves necessarily when it comes to their performance at work, but then there's other parts of their lives where maybe they experience more self-doubt. So it's really important to kind of consider that factor. It's not just you. And confidence takes practice. So that's where doing some mock interviews, as I mentioned earlier on, is super important. And then also engaging in some self-compassion exercises, taking some time out to be mindful, taking some time out to practice gratitude. So I personally have an app on my phone called Presently. So present, I can actually just type it in the chat box real quick. And I just love that it's a really super simple, easy to use platform. And you basically are just prompted with what were you grateful for today? And it kind of gives you a timeline of everything that you're grateful for. So a quote that I love is, where attention goes, energy flows. So if you spend your time paying attention to good things, your energy is going to flow in a more positive direction. So really catch yourself paying attention to things that you're grateful for. And that's a really good way to kind of channel, I would say, confidence. And I'm just gonna make sure that we're moving in the right direction with the slides. Yeah, so beating imposter syndrome, I think that engaging in self-compassion, gratitude, mindfulness is huge. And then also recognizing that you have something of value to offer, even if you don't see it yourself at first. So it's really important to get out there and show up with your knowledge, your skill, and experiences. I think more than ever, it's really important for people to come together and really show up for each other. And I have a little graph here about imposter syndrome. So you'll see that there's a circle, what I know, and then you kind of overestimate what you think other people know. But the reality is what you know is actually only a fraction of what other people know. So you have so much to share. So I want everybody to be cognizant of that and remember that next time you go into an interview, a networking session, or you're having, a conversation with anyone, that you have value to share, and don't be afraid to kind of, put it out there. And recovering from a job loss is something that I think a lot of people in this room might have experienced, and it's not easy, but it is something that I think it's an experience that's been a little bit more normalized, and there's less stigma around it now than there was before. So the one good side of this is that it's a lot easier to talk to a recruiter or an employer and to let them know that the reason I left my last job was actually because I was laid off. And now people kind of understand and they don't hold it against you. Whereas I think there was a bit more stigma in hiring when it came to layoffs in particular. And a key insight there is to take your time in between jobs to explore what brings you joy and what you can settle with in a career. So it's really important to be patient with yourself and not to try to rush through things or to jump the gun necessarily. And I would also say consider the job that you need before the job that you want, because as much as we want to be striving for our dream job, sometimes you need to just pay the bills, or especially in these circumstances, I think it's really important to have a routine or some sort of connection to the outside world when a lot of us are staying at home. So sometimes you just have to do what you have to do until you can do what you want to do. And that's a quote from Oprah. She's obviously a super inspiring woman. And then another quote that she has is to be thankful for what you have and you'll end up having more. So this kind of goes back to what I was talking about, where wherever you focus your attention is where your energy flows. So if you're able to focus on what you don't have, then you'll never have enough. And I think experiencing a job loss can kind of pull us into that direction if we're not careful. Yeah, so mindset is everything. Absolutely. I would say mindset is 80% of the game in business, right? Whether you're self-employed or you're looking for a job or you are currently employed, mindset truly is everything. And then moving on to getting past motivation blocks. So key insight here, treat job searching like a project with deadlines. I think deadlines make everything real. So some really good productivity tools that I enjoy using, aside from Google Calendar, of course, is Todoist. So Todoist is a really great tool, as well as Trello. And you can set up deadlines within Trello or Todoist to kind of keep you on track and to create some urgency around what you want to achieve and outlining what it is, all the different milestones that you need to get through, whether it's creating your resume, starting to network, fixing up your LinkedIn profile, and maybe even setting targets for yourself, such as this week, I want to have 5 conversations with absolute strangers, right? So getting out on LinkedIn and kind of giving yourself that goal and a deadline to make things real. Having a deadline system has really helped Katharina. That's great. And then another tip that I have is trying the Pomodoro Technique. So who has heard of the Pomodoro Technique in the room? And if anyone knows what Pomodoro means, it means tomato. So there's a really interesting backstory to how the technique came up. I think it was an Italian maybe inventor. So the idea there is to spend 25 minutes working and then 5 minutes on a break, and not just any break where you're kind of mindlessly scrolling through Instagram or kind of mindlessly staring out the window, but be really intentional. Use those 5 minutes to get up and do some jumping jacks, or use those 5 minutes to even lie down, but really, intentionally, meditate if that's something that you're into. So using those 5 minutes for rest or play, but being intentional with it and not mindless, right? And then there's a really great graphic here about the Pomodoro technique. So decide on the task that you need to do, set the timer to 25 minutes, work on the task until your timer rings, and then take a short 5-minute break. And remember, we're thinking of mindful activities, not mindless activities. And then go back to another 25 minutes and repeat that cycle. And if you plan on kind of having a longer work day after 4 cycles, then you can kind of increase your breaks to 15 to 30 minutes where you can kind of go have a lunch break or go for a longer walk, maybe listen to a podcast, one of those things. And lastly, for increased accountability on your job search, I think it can really help to join a community. So I would say even coming to a session like this, and I think TorontoJobs.ca has done a really great job of facilitating multiple workshops throughout the month, and topics will kind of rotate. So I would say that this is kind of a good way to join sort of a community, but there's also tons of Facebook groups out there, LinkedIn groups. And then I think even following career coaches on Instagram, for example. I think the world is really coming together and showing up in many different ways online, that you kind of feel that you're not alone and that you're getting the information that you need. And lastly, I think it can really help to hire a coach. So I think, when it comes to finances, that might be something that you have to kind of take a look at. But there are some coaches that also work on a model where they will work with you without any fee until you actually land a job, and then they'll kind of take a cut from there. So you can kind of explore options and see what makes the most sense for you and what would help you stay accountable and feel supported and keep you motivated throughout your job search, because you don't have to do it alone. It is difficult. And hopefully some of the tips here have helped you. But curious to hear, how is everyone feeling about their job search now? Hopefully there's a couple of people feeling motivated, excited. Yeah, relieved, love that. Feeling relieved. Okay, so I kind of just want to go to my last slide. Q&A. So I would love to take some questions if anyone has any thoughts on some of the topics that I mentioned today, such as interview jitters or imposter syndrome, motivation blocks. Okay, so I'll talk about a couple of common questions that I get when it comes to rejection sensitivity in particular. I think a lot of candidates that I've worked with have had, a struggle when it comes to responding to an email where they've been rejected. So a lot of candidates that I've worked with will typically have the instinct to just not reply and move on. So it's another type of ghosting, but I urge you not to do that. Again, there's that opportunity to maintain a relationship and nurture a relationship. Just because it's no for now doesn't mean that it's no forever. So the next time you are rejected for a job, I highly encourage you to have a template ready, just so that in case you do have some emotions come up, you have a template ready and you don't say something that you don't mean and hit send. Having that template in advance, to say, thank you so much for letting me know. And if there's other similar opportunities I would love to be considered. I'd also like to add you to my LinkedIn and stay connected, wishing you the best. And if there's anything I can do to improve in my job search, please do let me know. Your feedback would be highly appreciated. So something of that nature can really be helpful because they see that you're taking the note positively. They're not afraid that they're going to upset you further if they give you any critical feedback. So being open and positive in a moment where you could feel hurt can go a long way. And okay, a couple more questions coming in. So how do you fix your mindset to be motivated when you constantly get rejection? So as I mentioned, having a template ready that thanks them for getting back to you, letting them know that you would appreciate feedback to improve in your job search, keeping you in mind for similar roles. So kind of having that template ready, but then also doing a bit of self-reflection because you might not get feedback from them, right? So kind of asking yourself, what did I do well in the interview? What did I not do well, right? So being honest with yourself, what did I not do well in the interview? What could I have done better? Asking yourself those 3 questions. Another question I'm getting is, how do you get the right emotion for an interview? Great question. So I remember when I was younger, I would love to listen to my favorite song before I went into an exam. So I think getting in a good mood is so important. So a lot of the times people tend to fixate and, you know, go into overthinking mode, which doesn't really help because then you start thinking of all these what ifs. So once you've done your research, you're prepared, put it aside, and now think of activities that you can do to kind of pump yourself up. If you have a pump up song, or, you know, if going for a walk helps you, but doing some kind of mindful activity before you jump into an interview is key. Another thing I would also say is to, you know, if it's a Zoom interview, which I think a lot of them are these days, making sure that you have adequate time to set up. So do your mindful activity to make yourself kind of pumped up and happy, but then setting aside at least 15 minutes before the interview starts to make sure that there's no issues with your internet, your setup, you're feeling calm, prepared, and not stressed and jumping into a call. And then the next question is, how do you find common ground between messaging recruiters, managers, and feeling like you're being pushy? Always torn between the two when reaching out and networking. So follow-up is so important, and finding common ground rather than being pushy. So if it's sort of a cold LinkedIn message or a cold email, I think being transparent, or what I would call it is empathetic transparency, right? So empathetic transparency really is the key to nurturing relationships. And, you know, the way you can do this is kind of getting a sense of, what does this person care about? So as a hiring manager, I want to fill my role, right? So you kind of address that point and say that, you know, I understand that you're looking to fill XYZ role. I think I would be a great fit because of, and then just, you know, maybe name 1 or 2 key skills or highlights versus a whole bio, because that can kind of be overwhelming. So I think that goes back to that pushy piece. Like, you don't want to be sending somebody paragraphs, paragraphs upon paragraphs rather. Maybe keeping it to like 2 to 3 short, you know, maybe either bullet points or like 2 to 3 main points, maybe like 5 to 6 lines long. So like 2 points each or 2 lines each for your point. So kind of structuring it. And I think practicing with templates, that's the biggest thing here. A lot of anxiety and uncertainty can be overcome if you do the preparation and are proactive versus reactive. So hopefully everyone got some insight there and you're ready to crush your job search. And if you have any questions, I'll leave you some of my contact details. And yeah, enjoy the rest of today's event. Thank you.